I talked to over 1,000 people around the country, and they were from every background, every state except for Hawaii and Alaska, and every demographic identity, and every single one of them had something interesting to tell. And that's anybody you could pass by on your street, in your neighborhood, wherever you live. At the grocery store. That's there. You never know when you're going to connect with somebody over something that you either needed or you wouldn't have expected out of them.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Oh My Curry Goodness. My name is Hamza Islam, and on this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers from different fields about their story and how they became the person they are today. One of the cool things about Gen Zers is that they love to inspire people. And while it's great to talk about the amazing things that they've accomplished, it's also important to talk about the things that they've learned, the obstacles that they've overcome. Because no matter what we do in life, we are going to have obstacles along our path. And even though our obstacles will be different, it's about having that mentality to keep going and embracing all the difficulties throughout the journey to do something special. And that's what I love about this podcast, is not only getting to talk to some of the most incredible people of the Gen Z generation, but also to know more about them as a human being and understanding that not everything was all rainbows, for lack of a better term. So I hope you continue to support this podcast, continue to be inspired by all these amazing people, and just know that it's also okay to talk about yourself in an honest and authentic way. Now, this week is going to be a very interesting week because I'm talking to Imran Nuri, who is an artist, philanthropist, and storyteller. In 2019, Imran founded the 52 Million Project, a nonprofit that believes in power of collective action for common good. Donors gave no more than $52 each year to support 52 nonprofits who are fighting poverty. Now, he is the author of Advice from America, where he documents his journey traveling to 48 US states in 12 weeks to ask 1,000 strangers for life advice and photographing them on a 50-year-old camera. You can pre-order his book on his website at imrannuri.com, and this book will be released in December of 2023. Imran, of all the guests I've interviewed on this podcast, he's someone I've actually known for almost since childhood. So it's really cool to be able to connect with him and just get to know more about him and what's been going on throughout his journey. So Imran Nuri, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness. It's great to reconnect.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on here. I'm excited to tell you more about my journey and my story.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing. Like when I knew who you were because we grew up in the same South Asian community, and you know this better than anyone else. Like South Asian parents, like in our community, they love talking about their kids. And so I remember growing up, I think you had interest in oil painting or painting in general. And I remember like I would hear parents talking about how great you were as an artist. And then now that I see like the journey that you took traveling to 48 states, I was like, I got to get you on this podcast. And when I obviously knew who you were, but one of the things that stuck out was when I saw that you were on you had an interview with CNN. And that at that point I looked at my mom and I'm like, wait, is that the same one that I knew? Like, is there another Imran Nuri that I'm not aware of? And she's like, no, that's the one. That's the same Imran Nuri that we all grew up with. And the reason why I want to talk about that is I think for so many people, the journey that you took traveling to different parts of the country is amazing. But sometimes we don't know if what we're doing is impactful or insightful or beneficial unless we get external validation. And I've talked about this in previous episodes, but I still think it's an issue today where we don't know if we're doing good unless other people are telling us that we're doing good. Obviously, we'll talk about your journey, but I do want to ask you, when you were interviewed on CNN, or let me put it this way, did you ever feel like you were doing something beneficial and you never necessarily looked at getting validation from others? Like you knew what you were doing and you didn't need others to tell you that what you were doing was good.
It wasn't my intention when I went on this journey to recognition or eyes on what I was doing. It was more like I knew I wanted to go on this journey to figure something out for myself. And in the process, if I decide that it will be beneficial for people to learn from, great, I'll share it with the world. And if not, maybe I'll just keep it to myself. When I started the journey, I knew that I would turn it into a book, but initially the thought was I'll just make 25 copies and it'll be super limited edition. I'll just give it to a handful of people who supported the journey when I actually went on it and some other folks, here and there. But it'll just be a small thing, and then I'll share the rest on social media for people to learn from. So, it wasn't. I knew I wanted to do this just for me. It wasn't necessarily about external validation, and if that's what it was in the first place, I don't think the project would have turned out the way it did. I didn't do it for TikTok. I didn't do it for content. I did it because I wanted to learn something and experience something. And so in doing that, the entire series of photos and advice from strangers, it comes across as more authentic.
For sure. And I think what makes it really special is the fact that you're not just seeing, and it's funny because I say this a lot on this podcast. It's like you're not going to talk to them for who they are. You're talking to people for what they are, right? They're human beings just like you and I. And it's funny, like when I've been thinking about what I would love to do with this podcast, and when you're around people that really know the work that you do, they don't ever care about like the external success. They care more about the internal success. And I've been thinking lately, like I've been so inspired by learning so much from different people. I would love to have a book of my own. I don't know exactly the title of the book. I've never published a book, so I definitely want to do that in the future. But yeah, we'll see what happens. One of the things that really stuck out to me though was meeting people you've never met is definitely a skill that people need to do because it's not easy. And I remember, and again, maybe this is just because when I grew up, I saw, because I think you may be 6 or 7 years older than me. I'm not 100% sure. Um, because I'm 21, just to give context. But like when I first saw you, I used to think that you were like this respected person. You were smart, and obviously you are. But one thing that I didn't know was that you were a shy kid growing up, and now you're doing this journey where you're meeting people from all over the country, meeting people you've never met, and you're able to just to be you. And so I guess I do want to ask because sometimes I guess the definition of shyness changes for a lot of people because I think you can still be outgoing but also be shy at the same time. Like if I'm meeting someone new, I'm definitely very hesitant. But if it's someone I know, then it's like I can talk to this person for hours. So firstly, what did shyness look like to you growing up? And then secondly, are you also impressed by the fact that you're used to be this person who was, I guess, shy, and now you're someone who's able to strike a conversation with almost anybody? Obviously, there might be some people you could be nervous about, but for the most part, you're still able to meet people without any sort of fear.
Yeah, so I think one of the big things for me where the shyness, what it looked like and what it looks like now, the shyness for me before wasn't that I couldn't go in front of a room or an audience and deliver a speech. I had spoken to crowds of up to 10,000 people at a time with it didn't even faze me. It didn't make me nervous at all. But when it came to just day to day and wanting to talk to somebody who I saw on the street or somebody who I saw in a grocery store who I thought was interesting for any reason, I'd freeze up. I'd get in my head and say, "Oh man, I'd love to tell this person this thing or compliment them or whatever," and I just wouldn't. And so, a big reason why I did the trip at all was not just to like find this meaning of life and figure out what it means to make the most of life. It was also to get over that shyness in the most extreme way possible. To push myself out of my comfort zone and just talk to strangers. And that's combating like the first thing you learn as a kid, stranger danger. You're for me, it was combating like a truly deeply rooted, probably hardwired thing. Everything you learn from 0 to 5 is basically permanent. And so to get over that is to really have to fight it. And I did. And it got easier and easier and easier the more I talked to people because, when you're someone like you or me, you know how to talk to somebody. That's not the issue. The issue is getting over that initial hesitation or fear of talking to somebody new. After that, after you can get over that, it's easy.
For sure. And it's funny because I used to work at Home Depot, and obviously as some, if you whenever you work at a retail store, your purpose is to help someone. But usually if people saw me and they needed my help, I would do as I would do anything I could to leave the space. And it's not that I don't want to help them. It's just more of I'm just hesitant to reach out, or hesitant to help you because there's just that fear. But what is interesting though, and I think it's one of those things where whatever you do, it takes practice, it takes time. It's not something you can fix in a day. It's but definitely still show up and try as hard as you can, or try to do the best that you can. And what's also interesting is that while I also do podcasts, I also do door to door painting for a company, and just being able to go to each house and go to and meet different strangers and ask if they're interested in getting a painting or a free estimate, like that is nerve wracking because I've never met these people, and very good chance I'm never going to meet them in the future. But nevertheless, just still having that just the idea of showing up is still important. And I do want to ask, and I know this is, I mean, I've said this a lot, like a lot of the things when it comes to inspiration are cliche, but I still want to know from your perspective, like, what are some of the most important things you've learned about human connection and conversations? Because, as someone like we talked about how we're nervous meeting people, but then sometimes we don't realize that the overall benefit or the potential benefit. So I would love to know, like, what are some things you learned when it comes to, I guess what are some things that you find interesting when it comes to those human connections or those conversations?
Yeah, I think. Oh, so I think like what like it's exactly what you just touched on. It's so beneficial to connect with somebody, no matter whether you're going to see them again or not, whether they live in your neighborhood or not. It doesn't matter. It's nice to like have a conversation with somebody just because you're human, right? And so there's value in connecting with the people around us in that way. Is I think the takeaway for me at least. I talked to over 1,000 people around the country, and they were from every background, every state except for Hawaii and Alaska, and of every demographic identity, and every single one of them had something interesting to tell. And that's anybody you could pass by on your street, on your neighborhood, wherever you live, at the grocery store. That's there. You never know when you're going to connect with somebody over something that you either needed or you wouldn't have expected out of them.
For sure. I do want to talk about your journey of traveling to 48 states, but one of the things I want to talk about is you describe yourself as a fine art photographer. And one of the cool things about art is that it's one of the most underrated things in today's world, just because you don't understand the meaning behind it. Because a lot of people just see something as what it is without understanding the deeper meaning. And I want to ask you, like, what are some of the things you learned about art that you feel like has stuck with you today? Because, and I'm sure, like I said, there are many things that art is not just like an image. There's something more to it. And I think that there are certain life skills you can learn from being an artist or being someone who's involved in art. So I'd love to know from you personally, what are some of the things you learned about being an artist that you feel like has helped you into the person you are today?
Sure. Yeah. One of the best things about being an artist or creating art is that you get to explore the deepest, most vulnerable, most unknown feelings and ideas and turn them into usually something visual that somebody can see and experience as well. And so the nice part about that is, like you said, it's purely subjective, right? Somebody standing next to the same person at the same time, looking at the same work of art, might see something completely different or have a completely different emotional reaction to it then the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And so, what I like about that, at least for me, is that I get to take these broad concepts and ideas and explore them visually. And so, I've been working on a photo series for a long time about grief and loss, and how that manifests itself in many ways outside of losing a human being. That's been really interesting because it forces me to explore feelings that I don't want to explore. You know what I mean? Feelings that are very uncomfortable. And it forces me to figure out how to depict that in a way that feels right to the way I felt in the moment, things like that. The same thing is true of this series of asking 1,000 strangers for life advice. Really, the core idea is, what is the meaning of life? What does it mean to make the most of life? And that is highly subjective, right? That's different from person to person to person. And people who read all 1,000 pieces of life advice from the strangers I met might come to a different conclusion than the next person. My conclusion really is that the meaning of life or the purpose of it is not necessarily to be happy all the time, but to experience every piece of it fully. there's always going to be good things in life. There's always going to be bad things in life. And there's going to be a whole lot of the in between. And, to make the most of life, no matter how many years you get, you have to experience it all fully. You have to appreciate every single moment, whether it's good, bad, or in between. And so I think that's the fun of art. The fun of art is that, again, you get to explore big, big, big ideas that you wouldn't otherwise get to explore, right? Nobody in corporate America would have told me to go ask 1,000 strangers for life advice to discover the meaning of life. That's something that I did because I was an artist. It's like that. It's just I really enjoy that aspect of discovering, these deep aspects of life just by asking questions and just creating.
Yeah, and maybe you might want to touch on this because it was interesting. Is I had a friend of mine who I interviewed, and he said that when you're an artist, you don't have to you don't have like a specific rubric that you have to follow. And what he meant by that was like oftentimes like especially in school when you're told to write something or you're told to draw something, it's like you need to do this way to get 100%. But I think when you get to focus on art for yourself, you have this idea. It's like you don't have to follow someone's expectations. You just have your own personal expectations. And sure, there might be some growing pains along the way, but nevertheless, like when you don't have to do things for other people and you're doing things for yourself, that's how you can truly embrace that level of authenticity, especially in art. So yeah, like I don't know if that's something you ever like. I don't know. Is that something you think of? Like you don't have to follow. Like you don't ever have someone else's expectations. You have your own expectations, and I know that can be a challenge because I think for a lot of us we love to be critical of ourselves, but nevertheless, like I guess you're free in the sense that you don't have to do things for other people. You're doing this because you find interest in it.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. I think about how you can be an artist who sells their work in galleries or at art shows or festivals or wherever it might be, and that's how you make your living. But what that ends up doing to you is that you have to create work that you know is going to sell. And that takes away from the authenticity of the ideas or the creation. And that's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with artists who create work that's designed to sell. But there's a certain freedom that comes with having a day job that pays your bills and everything else, which frees you up and gives you the time to have your evenings and weekends and days off to create whatever you want, regardless of whether people are going to like it or not. And I thought about the same thing for this whole thing. I photographed people on a 50-year-old camera that actually takes beautiful photos. But I wasn't worried about like perfect composition or perfect lighting or even getting like some of the photos aren't even in focus. They're slightly out of focus. And so it doesn't matter, right? Because what matters is that you can tell it's a human being, you can tell what they're wearing, you can tell what's in their background. And then you can hear what they said. And I can do that because I didn't have to worry about making money for this series, right? I was willing to lose and spend a certain amount of money to make it happen with no expectation of ever recuperating it. And that allowed me to create something that, like you said, has no expectations of others. I'm not aiming for a 100% in anything because it's highly subjective. And so there's a freedom in having the source of income that's not art, so that when you're an artist, you can create things that you want to create.
I want to transition into the philanthropy side of you because I know that, and you might need to correct me on this. I know you're no longer a part of the 52 million project, but what I do want to ask is, what are some of the connections you found between being an artist and being a philanthropist? Because I think when experiences or when it comes, I mean, there's so many things you can learn from two things, even no matter how opposite they are on the spectrum. So, for example, I had someone who focuses on giving back to the homeless or helping people who are dealing with homelessness. But for a period of time, he also does modeling, and so I asked him some of the connections he had. So I want to know from your perspective as a philanthropist and an artist, what are some of the connections you found, even though on the outside it seems like they may not have a lot of similarities.
Yeah, I think so. So that was interesting because I had created that nonprofit from nothing, and so it was really like a journey to build a business that happened to be the nonprofit model. And when you're doing that, and when you're an artist, some of the similarities there, just from a logistics standpoint, is that nobody's telling you what to do. There's no one path. You just have to figure things out for yourself day after day after day after day. But beyond that, on a more like soft note, is really that when you're a nonprofit, Usually, and in our case, we were helping people who are experiencing poverty. The similarities really go down to a love for humanity, right? A love for the people around us, a love for people who we might never ever meet. Our when I ran the 52 million project, every single week we would make a donation to a different nonprofit, and those nonprofits were all over the country. I will never ever meet the people that we helped. Neither will the donors of the 52 million project. You just have to be okay with giving something that you earned money and giving it to someone who you'll never know, you'll never meet, you'll never even fully know the impact. In theory, you'll know that sure, it may have fed them this many meals, may have housed them for this many nights, this or that. But at the end of the day, you're helping somebody you don't know, you'll never know. And there's something interesting about that, and how it relates to art, because sometimes art is the same way. You create something for yourself usually, and if it helps somebody else or it gives somebody else an emotional reaction or response, then that's amazing. And it might that your artwork might last 100 years, it might last hundreds of years, it might only last a few years, and then it gets thrown away or destroyed or something. But regardless, it's really about helping others who you'll never meet, no, you'll never know their full journey or story, you'll just help them.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how art can just make an impact on people because again, I mean, creating a nonprofit organization, people can easily see that and go, "Oh yeah, I can see that you're helping people." But that sometimes you don't realize when it comes to taking a specific photo or creating something out of nothing, especially when it comes to art, you don't realize the actual potential that it has and how it does have a meaning and that it can be used to inspire someone or make someone feel a certain way. And I think and those are some great ways of helping people. I know, like I said, you're no longer a part of the project, but do you see yourself ever going back into the philanthropy space? I know this past year you were traveling all around the country and you obviously have a book coming out, but do you ever want to hopefully revisit philanthropy at some point, or are you kind of just moving on, I guess, in some sense?
Yeah, I will definitely make, nonprofits and philanthropy a part of what I do in the future. I still do actually to this day. Philanthropy looks like a lot of different things. A lot of people think philanthropy is just money, but in reality, philanthropy is your time, talent, or treasure. And treasure is that money aspect. But I still give my time to different like organizations. I still give my talents when I can, usually now to students, even for this, for example, to be on your podcast is a chance for me to give to a student who is part of the same alma mater that I was part of. And I'm giving you an hour of my time. And that's something that I wouldn't just do for everybody. And so the philanthropy looks like a lot of different things. And when I have more money, it'll be back to, giving treasure. But for now, what I have is the ability to dictate my time and the ability to choose who I give my skills and talents to. And I choose that very carefully. So yeah, it's always it's a core part of who I am. There's no getting rid of it. It's something my parents taught me from, like I said, from 0 to 5 is when things become permanent. And that's something I was taught from 0 to 5 is that you give to others who need your help. That's how you use privilege. When you have privilege, you use it to uplift others who don't have it. And so there's a million different ways to do that. And it's always going to be something that's part of what I'm doing.
Yeah, and everything you just said, it sort of reminds me of the word value, right? Because I used to think for a long time that when someone was a philanthropist, it just meant they were just giving money away. But it can also just mean like what you do to inspire others. How do you provide value? How do you make someone's day 1% better? And I think it's funny because I've talked about this in previous conversations, and I know I keep talking about previous, but I feel like everything you just say reminds me of so much of what I've had in the past, where everyone can be an entrepreneur because entrepreneurs are essentially solving problems. Yes, it's true. Money is one thing, but being an entrepreneur means you find a problem and how do you solve that problem. So I feel like in the same way, philanthropy is similar in that it doesn't always have to mean giving money away or giving money to a specific cause. It can also mean just figuring out how to make someone's day better. And I think that's really interesting to put it. I don't know why. Like sometimes I feel stupid because I'm just thinking it's like money, money, money. But now it's like money can mean something, but also there are other ways to give back. And I don't know, some people always say like definitions are changing for some reason, but I feel like being an entrepreneur and being a philanthropist, it's not like you don't need to necessarily have money. It's just like what you're doing to make someone's day better, or some like issue that you hopefully want to solve in the future. I don't know if that made sense, but those are some of the things that I usually think about when I see the term philanthropy now and also being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think that's exactly right.
Um, I want to now talk about the advice from America, and one thing I always try to do on this podcast. And yes, it's a growing pain. It's a process, but I do love asking difficult questions. I want to be able to have my guests to be able to. I want my guests to be able to really think about their journey or think about the questions. And here's the thing: you ask a very unique question, which is, "What do you know now?" You asked 1,000 strangers, "What do you know now that you wish you knew earlier?" And that's such a difficult question to ask, or it's a difficult question to a difficult it's difficult to find an answer for because you just don't know, and it's not as simple as it seems. When you were going throughout this journey, what made you come up with this question? And was it a question that you always knew you wanted to ask, or was it a situation where you're like, should I ask this question? Should I ask this question? Then ultimately, the question of what do you know now that you didn't know then? Like, was it one of those things where it took a while before you found the right question, or was that the question you always wanted to ask?
Yeah, well, I tested this series on a much smaller scale here in Chicago before actually going all in on going around the entire country and asking, strangers something. And the questions I asked people in Chicago when I was testing it were around, I asked people, what would you do or how would your life change if you knew you were going to die in a year? I asked people what their biggest regrets were. I asked them, this and that. And what I ended up finding out was that the question that worked the best was that question: what do you know now that you wish you had known earlier? Or what's something you had to learn the hard way? Or what do you wish you could tell a younger version of yourself? And, it's funny because the answers that come out of that aren't necessarily advice because they're not telling me advice. I didn't want them to give me, as the 24-year-old last year, advice. I wanted them to give it to themselves so that they could share their story and their experiences. And if somebody reads or hears their story and resonates with that, that's way better than having someone tell you what to do, right? Traditional advice is not actually that helpful. Nobody wants to be told what to do like that. So that was the question I landed on because it was so open ended. People could talk about really deep and emotional things, or they could talk about really surface level practical things. I had people talking about trauma, and I also had people talking about just saving more money, and I had everything in between. And so it was so open ended, and it was so open even to interpretation by the strangers I met that it was perfect. I got a huge variety of answers, and I felt like that was the best way to get life advice.
Yeah, it is such an interesting question. And here's the thing. I know a lot of people are, and you've asked this, which is, what advice would you give to your younger self? Is there a part of you that wishes you could ever meet with your younger self? Like, is there ever a point where you like you wish you could spend time with that younger version of you? And I don't know. I'll give you an example. Like sometimes, like I usually like my parents will always say like when they were little, when I was little, like I was such a energetic kid. People like I used to watch Mickey Mouse Clubhouse every single day, and I don't know why. Like I would love to be able to not only just talk to my younger self, but I also want to be able to maybe one day spend some like hypothetically, I would love to be able to spend time with my younger self. And I think of like the difference between talking with someone and spending time is just I find that spending time it requires more time because talking can be done in a relatively short term, but spending time is more of like a long-term thing. So I don't know if that made sense. Maybe I'm just being crazy, but I do want to ask you like is there a part of you that would hope like is there a part of you that wonders if you could ever spend time with your younger self, like actually having like spending more time rather than just saying one or two things.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's interesting. I go back and forth between this. I go back and forth between wanting to spend time with a younger version of myself and being able to coach him and tell him what's going on and just put him in the right direction. At the same time, I fully understand that there's no changing the past and that everything I've done in the past, every single tiny action has led me to the moment right now. And there's even a stranger, I think it was stranger number 668 in my series, who perfectly called this out. He goes, if you subscribe to the idea that you could change something, then you're also subscribing to the idea that at some point you've gone astray, right? At some point you've made the wrong decision and now you're on the wrong path. But in reality, everything, unfolds as you move through it. So, sure, I'd love to spend time with my younger version of myself. But if I did, I would want to also know that it wouldn't change anything about my future, and in that way, I think that, and this is getting a little bit like derivative of like reality, but in that way, you can meditate and talk to your younger self as you are right now. It might not change anything about your past, but it could be a healthy experience to sit and think about and have a conversation with a younger version of yourself, just to say whatever you need to say. Like, hey, you're going to go through this. It's going to be fine. You're going to get through it. You've gone through this XYZ has happened. You're here right now. You're alive and well. Everything's going to be fine. If that's what I need to do, you can. That I think for me is better than actually, potentially time traveling and spending time with a younger version of myself, which would inevitably change the direction of my life. If I go back a few years ago and say to my younger self, hey, you're going to go on this adventure around the country where you're going to talk to strangers and ask them for life advice, I'd be willing to bet that me telling my younger version, that me telling a younger version of myself that might prevent that from happening at all. And so, yeah, I go back and forth. Sure, in theory, it'd be nice to talk to my younger self, but at the same time, I can't. And so that's also part of the beauty of that preposterous question I ask people. Right? It's absurd. It's an absurd question because no matter how much you want to change your past or tell yourself something, you can't. And so it's fun to think about, but at the same time, it's like it's all in theory, right?
Right. It's kind of, it's like it just I don't know why. For some reason, it just reminds me of Back to the Future. Great movie, but I don't know. It just gives me
Yeah.
those connections. Um, when I was looking at your story, there were so many moments where, again, I mean, when we how we grew up, people would normally want us to take the safe route, and that's it's understandable because you'll always hear that story of we work so hard to provide you a better life, and no matter who you are, you do have to respect that because life is not easy, and I'm sure you know that better than anyone else because of the people that you meet. But just to give like some numbers, 84 days. You did this for 84 days. Used a 50-year-old camera, drove all around the country, and to be more specific, around 15,298 miles. That's insane. Let's just put it that way. But tell me a bit about, you know, you are someone that's a very positive minded person. You're someone who likes to be outgoing. You mentioned how when you meet people, you would smile. You have this friendly version of you, and that's usually on the outside. But on the inside, when you're taking such a big journey, how often did you feel like giving up? Because and you can I know I only mentioned like some bits, and you can feel free to talk more about what that journey was like, but sometimes it's like because of how insane or amazing the idea can be, sometimes we just don't know for some reason if we're doing the right thing, or maybe we feel like we're wasting enough money, or sorry, we're wasting money, we're wasting time. Did you ever feel like you were giving up, or were you always willing to embrace the challenges? Because kind of like you said, you don't have to necessarily be happy, but you can definitely embrace all the highs and the lows.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I was 100% all in when I left for that trip. When I left Columbus, Ohio, and knew that I was going to be on the road for up to 100 days, I knew that failure was not an option. And I think that giving up is almost always a choice. Almost always. Like sometimes life makes it so that basically your only option is to give up. For example, if I had totaled my car on the trip, it would be almost impossible to continue the journey. However, there's always a way to get around, obstacles that are trying to force you to give up. If that had happened, maybe I would have rented a car for the rest of the time. Maybe I would have started leasing a car for the rest of the time, even though it's probably not a good financial decision to do that. Something like that. There's like almost always the choice to give up. Sometimes it's for the best, sometimes it's not. And for me, anytime that I had a challenge or an obstacle, a roadblock, whatever it might have been, I reminded myself that failure was not an option, that this was just part of the journey, that not everything is going to be fun and exciting, that sometimes it's going to be scary or, unhealthy or whatever, it might just be bad, at times. That's part of the process. That's part of life itself. Things are going to be good. They're going to be bad. They're going to be in between. And so, I think there was never a point on the entire trip where I was like, oh, I just want to I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. There were definitely times that were harder than others. There were times where I was like, I feel like I've gotten everything that I wanted to get out of this trip, but I still have a few weeks left to go, you know. But at the same time, I was like, I committed to doing this. I quit my full-time job to do it. I am here. I'm thousands of miles away from home, and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna and you know the way you somebody once I think somebody one of the strangers even said the way you finish is the way it was, and so I knew I wasn't going to finish weak or give up early or cut it short or whatever it might have been. I had an idea. I set out to do it. I was gonna do it. Failure wasn't an option.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, it's like failure is some like I think sometimes we tend to underestimate like what failure can mean because like we think failure is a bad thing, but it's like for you it almost feels like everything is a it's a chance to grow and learn. And I love how you were so dedicated to the thing. It's like almost like you found your why, and why you did it was like it protected you from, I guess, outside forces. And I know that's such a cliche Star Wars like thing, but it's like you get what I'm trying to say. Like sometimes like when we don't like sometimes when we feel like giving up, it's like why we're so passionate about it in the first place protects us from any sort of like obstacle that we may have. But speaking a little bit about, I don't want to say giving up, but I do want to ask you, you talked a little bit about how your relationship with shyness. I want to ask you what were some of the other fears you had throughout your journey? Because I mean, shyness, of course, is one thing, but was there anything else? Like, I'll ask you, I'll give you an example. Like, I went to Nevada this like a few years ago, and one of my fears was just, and I know this is completely random, but just to give you a small example, like my fear was I don't want to go to Nevada because like scorpions and spiders, and as someone who has huge arachnophobia, like I don't want to I don't want to go near that. So I know that's still like a bad example because I know not everything about Nevada is deserts and spiders and scorpions, but what were some of the fears that you had and how are you able to overcome them?
Yeah, I think personal safety was by far my biggest fear, just because I was living in my car, sleeping at rest areas, talking to strangers. I didn't, you know, I didn't carry a gun with me or anything like that. I did have pepper spray at times, but even then, I didn't carry it around with me. It was just in the car for when I was, you know, sleeping overnight uh, alone. And so personal safety was probably the biggest fear factor there. I didn't want to get mugged. I didn't want someone to steal my stuff. I didn't want to get into a car accident, none of that. And then of course, you know, you factor in the fact that I'm also a person of color going into rural America at times or areas that are completely unknown. And I was afraid that maybe I'd be a victim of a hate crime too, you know, of racism. And what I found was that overwhelmingly people were very kind to me. Now I mostly chose cities, right? Even in the deep South, I was mostly in cities, but there were many times that I was in towns of less than 10,000 people that were probably 95% white. And in those towns, you know, sometimes I felt uncomfortable. Other times I was like, yeah, I'm an outlier. I know that, but everybody around here seems pretty nice anyway. Um, you know, that's not to say that the experience would have been say the same for me if I was any other, you know, demographic. Maybe it would be different if I was a woman. Maybe it'd be different if I was East Asian. Maybe it'd be different if I was Black. I have no way of knowing for sure. But for me, I really did like. I was very surprised by how kind people were to me. But yeah, that was definitely a fear factor. I thought about that all the time. I was like, am I going to be harmed by somebody just for the way I look, or just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time? And maybe I got lucky, but maybe humanity is a little bit better than we think it is.
And actually, that's it's really interesting because I remember you said on previous interviews when you would go to the South is that they weren't necessarily frightened by you, but they were more curious about you in a positive way. They're like, oh, here's someone who I've never met. I've never met this kind of person. I would love to know more about who this person is and what this person is doing in a good way. And here's the thing, like I think, and maybe you might not be the best person when it comes to the idea of talking about stereotypes, but you know, when a lot of people will say, "Hey, don't go to the South because that's where all bad like, that's where bad things happen, and if you're a person of color, that's the last place you want to be." And here's the thing: everyone's experiences and perspectives are different. So, like, kind of like how you talked about how maybe you were just lucky, or maybe your experience will definitely be different from someone else. But do you feel like maybe, especially with people of color, and I know it's so weird, and we can cut this off if it doesn't make sense, but do you feel like sometimes people of color, whether that's our skin color or someone else, maybe we can also learn to maybe not stereotype certain parts of the country, if that makes sense? So when someone like looks at like someone who's brown, for example, they might think like, oh, look, they're a threat to society. Do you think people of color like can also learn from like you, and knowing that the South is not as bad as we think it is? Sure, there may be some bad parts or like some places you don't want to go to, but to generalize the idea that going to the South is like a bad, like the worst thing you can do, I think you're like you're you're causing more fear than there needs to be. I don't know if that made sense.
I know what you're getting at. Yeah, it's the idea of like, are things actually as bad as we think they are? And it's interesting because yes and no, because if as humans, we're patternistic. We are the ultimate pattern machines. We identify patterns and live our lives based on the patterns that we've identified, which is why we're able to survive. But it's also the reason why we have negative stereotypes. Well, it's also the reason why we have something like that, where if you're a person of color in America and you live in the Midwest or Northeast or wherever else, and you all you see on the news or TikTok or wherever is that if a hate crime happens because of race, it's more often to happen in the South. And of course, you're going to have a defense mechanism, right? Because your brain is identifying a pattern that people who are not white in rural deep South, like, are when you see that that happens over and over again, where people are being harmed just simply for being not white, then of course you should have a defense mechanism. Of course you should be hesitant about going somewhere. It shouldn't be the first place you want to go, and it might genuinely be a dangerous place for you to be. That said, there is a balance where when you're just watching the news, when you're just on TikTok and or social media, you see the worst of the worst things that happen anywhere at any time, and that's an unfortunate downside of social media, where that is good for the algorithm and it's good for these platforms to keep people on, but it's not good for us because all we see are bad things. And when all you see are bad things, it's again we're patternistic. So what we're going to think that what we're seeing on social media and the news is bad, 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 bad. We're going to assume the world is all bad, and that's not the truth, right? Like, we need to all go touch some grass is basically what it comes down to. But you're right. Like, the South isn't, it's not just the South. Like, America in general is not as bad or as racist as it might seem when all you're doing is watching the news. That's not to say it's not racist. There are still huge major issues. Those things are still very, 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 very real. And at the same time, there's so much we can do just by coming together and having those very important conversations. There's so much more we can do when we find a common ground together, and then go into having the challenging conversations about race and any other kind of hotly contested subjects. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's I wouldn't say that's I wouldn't go as far as to say like it is entirely on black or brown folks that the South has the rap that it does. And that's definitely not it. So yeah, again, all that to say, sure, we have our stereotypes, and they're all of them. They're all worth reevaluating, but at the same time, some of them exist for a reason.
Yeah, and thank you so much for being able to answering that question. I know it can be a very tricky topic. So I was just thinking like, okay, like how do we make sure that like, because I like I said, everyone's experience is different, but it's like sometimes we tend to put more fear than we need it. So again, it's everyone's perspectives, but nevertheless, thank you for answering that question, because I was also worried like, what if it would come out wrong? Um, Before I let you go, I want to ask you about your future. And obviously, we talked about how your book Advice from America is coming out in December of 2023. You talked about how you want to still be involved in philanthropy in the future. As someone who's willing to embrace challenges and go all in on what you're passionate about, what are some other things that you want to be able to try and do in the future? I mean, I don't know if climbing Mount Everest is on your list. I definitely could see you doing that. I don't know why, but I just do. But what are some things you hopefully want to do in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure yet. The book is going to come out later this year. And then after that, it's really going to be a lot of promoting it, talking about the journey, and basically inspiring others to do the big things that they want to do, right? That's what I think 2024 is going to look like for me. But more than that, I think the theme of the book and it's not even just the book, the photo series at all. What I realized after coming back from the journey, after hearing all this advice, is that we have a lot more in common with the world around us than we actually think. And that's the message I really want to share in 2024 is promoting that sense of unity at a time where it feels like every day we're a little bit more divisive, again, because of social media and the media in general. But I think there's so much work to be done to bring people together. And I'm hoping that I can be a catalyst for that in whatever way that looks like.
You so obviously people you are someone that will ask people what advice would you tell them? What do you know now that you wish you knew what you wish you knew then? I want to ask you that question. What is something you know now that you wish you knew you knew in the past? And secondly, and like we talked about how that's such a difficult question, where do you rank that in terms of the difficult question someone has asked you?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging question because there's so many different things. Like, naturally, part of living is having regrets. Like, everybody's going to have regrets about something or another. I think for me, when I think about what I wish I could tell a younger version of myself, specifically when I was maybe 18 or 19, I would have really told myself to embrace new experiences and new opportunities without hesitation, to say yes to more things, and to find a better balance of prioritize between prioritizing school, work, the grind and social life. I feel like I always put social life on the back burner. And so I didn't make the closest friends the first couple of years. I had tons and tons of friends, but none of them felt like really, really, really close. And I think that could have been fixed or changed had I had somebody say like, "Hey, you don't have to work as hard as you're working right now. You can actually spend more time going out with friends and just doing nothing." Which I didn't do a lot of after my freshman year. And so I wish I could tell myself that, just to have strengthened those friendships, to have really prioritized what's most important in life, and that's spending the time with the people you care about. But yeah, I think if I had said yes to more things or been more open to new ideas, I think I would have been less judgmental. I think I would have blossomed into the person I am now faster. But again, everything happened the way it did. And everything that I did and learned or didn't do led me to this moment right now. And so, I have no regrets about any of the things that I think went wrong in the past.
My last question, and this is more of like a question I've been thinking of, is probably like my signature question. I don't know, I'm still working on it, but you talked about how failure doesn't exist. And for you, and I want to ask you, like, if we ignore the failure word or ignore that word, if there was another word you wish you could take out of the dictionary because you feel like this word or phrase has like a negative, could have a negative impact on people, what would that be and why?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me think about that. A word that I would take out of the dictionary or just out of like general use. Hmm. It wouldn't be failure, because failure exists for a reason, right? We have goals, we set them, and if we don't meet them, that's failure, right? That's natural. That's a natural part of life. That you're gonna have goals and aspirations and dreams, and if you don't get them, that's failure. I think it's less about the word failure and more about the social stigma of it, right? I think it's been a long time of people saying failure is 100% outright bad. And it's not black and white like that. Like, failure is always a chance to learn and grow. And I would argue that the best learnings in life happen from when you fail first. And yeah, if there was a word that I would have to take out, I mean, I have no idea what that would be. I don't think I would take out a single word in the dictionary. I think words add to our ability to communicate to one another. But I would say, like, to your point, I would take away the stigma of something like failure, or taking away the stigma or the fear of not achieving what you want to set out to do. I think that the reason why people don't do things is a fear of failure or a fear of success. And that's different. It weighs out differently for different people. But I guess I would say that just like anybody who looks at failure as something that is black and white bad, I would encourage you to think about it as an opportunity to learn and grow. Whether your dreams happen or not, failures will happen along the way. and it's all part of the process.
For sure. I think that's a great answer. And if there is one thing people can learn about words is that they do have meaning, and they can mean sure there's like sometimes they can have negative connotations, but they also have things where they also have good connotations, and that it's not as black and white. But speaking of words having different meanings, Advice from America comes out in December of 2023. You can obviously pre-order this book at imrannuri.com. Imran, I know I've taken a lot of your time. I know you are a very busy person, but nevertheless, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness. I'm really looking forward to reading the book. Can't wait to see all the amazing things that you did throughout this journey. And I look forward to hopefully reconnecting again in person. I know it's been a long time, but I would definitely love to come back to Chicago, because I was in Chicago like a couple of weeks ago. So being able to connect with you again would be really cool. So thank you so much. And I really look forward to seeing all the amazing things you do, not just with this book, but also in the future.
Yeah, of course. Thanks again for having me on your podcast.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.